busted out a classic hat this morning. The Consume hat from 2005. The old consumption tour. Oh, God. That goes back to my heyday of university. My buddy from Toronto came up. Just smashing tins all weekend. Not tens. Tins of beer cans. The consumption tour. Whoa. I don't think I could survive that weekend at my advanced age now. What I have to do this weekend, aside from wash the car, moweth the lawneth, if I've got the courage to do that before it's 30 degrees outside. I gotta go get shoes today. Not because I don't own any, and that's why I'm in bare feet. For all you feet fan out there, check this shit out. Maybe I should start selling 6 pics of these bad boys on the old internet. I wonder if, I know there's men that have a foot fetish. Not so sure about women with a foot fetish. I'm sure they do. I have, in my honest opinion, thankfully, don't think ever met a woman with a foot fetish. I'll massage a foot. Don't get me wrong. But not exactly into the... God, it gives me the oogies up my spine thinking about what foot fetishing involves. But to that point, life is a lot more unaffordable. Maybe I should just start selling pics. Do I have pic-worthy feet? Do I have fetish-worthy feet? I don't know. Maybe I should post a picture on the old website and put it to the public vote. How do we get on that? I need running shoes. That's it. Yep. I need some new running shoes for actual running. Day shoes will last a decade, but my running shoes barely last a year. It's crazy. You spend like $150, $200 Canadian on a pair of shoes. And, you don't want to get crap running shoes because I think about my knees and my ankles and my calves and my hamstrings and my tendons all through my legs and my hips and my lower back. You want to get good running shoes that don't make sure you're not destroying your body by trying to stay healthy by doing a bit of cardio. And then when the shoes fall apart, you realize they're half made of cardboard, which I thought was a joke from medieval shoes or whatever. But no, in modern shoes, there is a lot of cardboard. I guess it's to keep it light. Definitely to keep it cheap. So I gotta go get running shoes. I don't want to, but I gotta. People that walk need really good shoes, and that brings me to an interesting point. Just in the world of Canada today, we got through an airline strike this last week. Really interesting. Usually I get the hackles on the back of my neck standing up when I hear there's a strike because I'm like, what are they complaining about now? Especially living in Quebec has given me like post-traumatic stress disorder about strikes, especially public worker strikes, because there's no real negotiation. They just go on strike. It's very French. But, usually I always wonder if unions really think things through about like their economic situation and what they're asking for. But in the case of the Air Canada one, I have to say there was one particular thing where the union had a pretty strong argument. And I didn't realize this, and I'm glad that, the news informed me and I learned something. And maybe I had known it and I had forgotten, but that Air Canada employees that work flights, like the cabin crew and all that stuff, were not being paid for the times that they were not physically on board the airplane. That's wild. So they would have to go to work, obviously, you can't just show up and walk on the plane. You've got to be there ahead of time. There's planning to do. You got to get through the airport. I would figure that an airline employee's shift, even if they're cabin crew and aircraft crew rather than being airport staff, like check-in people and baggage people and boarding people, but you would figure that by and large, your shift, your work starts when you show up at the airport. I personally, on a spiritual level, I guess, I consider that the airport is a workplace for those people. Like, they're not there for fun. So you'd figure you'd have to pay them. What I hate about strikes is, of course, especially in transportation, is everybody that relies on it gets stranded. Like, people have out thousands of dollars for hotel costs at the airport. Air Canada will never reimburse them because somehow a strike, and get this, a strike has somehow been deemed outside of Air Canada's control. And I see both sides of the argument. If Air Canada was deemed to always be in control of when strikes happen, the union would have that much more leverage over them to give them whatever they want, because not only would they be on the hook to give in to demands, but they would also be on the hook if a strike did happen to reimburse people affected by the strike. But, man, to say that a strike is totally out of the organization's control is totally untrue. But I don't think there's a happy middle ground there. So, yeah, that was weird. And another thing, tying back to, going to follow my leapfrog logic of going from feet to shoes to whatever. When the strike ended, and it did end quickly, took government intervention, but it did end quickly, the Canadian Postal Union was upset that the Air Canada strike had taken attention away from their own labor dispute with Canada Post. And I've known people that worked Air Canada. I know that Air Canada has not been the best run organization. They botched. For you Americans that don't know, there used to be two major Canadian airlines. There used to be Air Canada and Canadian Airways. And in the 90s, I want to say it was the mid-90s, it might have been the early 90s. Fact check me on that. They merged the two airlines. Air Canada took over Canadian. And one of the big mistakes they made, because those two airlines were good back, well, all airlines were a lot better back in those days. Airlines are light years worse now on every measurable level. What they did is that Canadian was like going bust anyway. Those people would have lost their jobs. When Air Canada took over, they made this idiotic decision to integrate all the Canadian Airways employees at their existing levels of seniority. And this is hard to explain, but what that meant is that Air Canada employees that had a certain level of seniority within Air Canada, in some cases lost seniority to incoming Canadian Airways employees. And that, I think, started a whole thing where Air Canada employees just haven't been happy since. Now, a lot of those people, that's 30 years ago, a lot of those people are now gone, retired. But I remember having a girlfriend back in those days. Her mom was an Air Canada aircraft crew. Well, employee. I think she did also airport stuff. But she had a day shift before the Canadian merger and then fell back on a night shift afterwards. And she was never happy. I wouldn't have been happy about that. If I had worked nights to finally get promoted to days and then got demoted, in so many words, back to nights, I'd be pretty pissed off. Anyways, I have a little less sympathy for the postal union. And it's not because I don't think that the postal people should be paid fairly. I think I think everything is less affordable now. I think, employers really have to look at labor costs, and there has to be kind of a whole Western world discussion about the absolute pilfering by the tech bros and the billionaires of capital into their own pockets, rather than, having economic power distributed amongst the people the way it was 50 years ago. We're back into time of robber barons. But in the case of Canada Post, having known some people that worked at Canada Post, they were frustrated working there, not because of the employer was part of it, but because of the employees. Canada Post, if you worked a little too hard, if you showed a little too much drive, a little too much ambition, people would get upset with you. They would be like, hey, why don't you just slow it down a little bit? You're making the rest of us look bad. Hey, your break was 5 minutes ago. You better go take that break and take an extra 5 minutes. There's just an attitude of bare minimum that I was told exists in that place. And it kind of permeates into the larger discussion of what's going on with Canada Post, in that the postal union wants all of these things, increases in pay, increases in benefits, but they have been wholly almost... First of all, there's nobody mails letters, so they've lost a lot of business. Nobody mails flyers. Everything's done on the internet. That's technological obsolescence, right? I think U.S. Post has to deal with the same thing. All postal services around the world have to deal with that. We don't send correspondence physically anymore. It's electronically. All we get in the post are cheap coupons now. That's, frustrating. All they deliver is garbage. And then what is growing business, packages, because people shop out less. Like they consume less going to the store, and they do a lot more online ordering, myself included. Canada Post had the opportunity to capture that business, and because of their bare minimum attitude of the union, they couldn't match the service levels of other carrier services, courier services like FedEx, Purelator, UPS. Intelcom is the one that I see in Montreal. I don't know how big they are. I've never, researched it. But for Amazon, Amazon has their own delivery service in Montreal. They're using this company called Intelcom. But these guys will deliver from 8 in the morning till 10 at night. They'll deliver on weekends. Canada Post didn't want to do that. Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Like, okay. So your competitor has more flexibility and more availability, more hours during the day and more days during the week. How do you expect to compete and therefore retain your market share if you're not willing to put in those hours? And the postal union, again, we don't want to, do this part-time worker thing. And I agree that unless part-time work is really carefully managed, right? And I know that there was a big movement in the U.S. of, part-time employees being given 20-hour shifts but being told to be available for 40 hours a week. That's not fair. You people need set shifts, because if you're going to work a 20-hour-a-week job, you have to assume that the person also has to find another 20-hour-a-week job at least, right? If they're going to they'll have to do 2 part-time jobs. So to tell them, I'll give you 20 hours, I'll pay you 20 hours, but I need you available for 40, that's not logical, right? That's just not sensible. I think the restaurant industry is really, and retail are very bad respecters of that kind of principle, because most of those places are managed incompetently anyway. But for Canada Post, you could set shifts and have people working this route, this day, that day, and deliver packages. It's massive business. In that case, I consider Canada Post and the union equally to blame for not having captured that market share, for Canada Post now being in dire straits financially. They can't, like, the union's asking for things, and Canada Post, I can see where they're coming from. They're going, that's awesome. You want a 20, with what money shall I pay you? There is no money. And again, it's this thing of a lot of people in those unions that just assume that management has these untold billions of dollars to give away. It's just, no. Not in that industry. There are people like pilfering the pockets of everybody, but, in Canada, one of the biggest names that's doing that is Galen Weston, the owner of the Loblaws Group, right? That's a grocery chain. Grocery guys are pilfering money. The tech bros are pilfering money, but people that deliver packages, it's not a great margin business to start. There isn't billions going into the bank account to pay out employees massive salaries. It goes to a larger discussion of, if we were to look across the network of public employees, especially in Canada, where there's a lot more social benefits, the amount of money that is lost, and I probably have talked about this before, the amount of money that is lost on ridiculous union demands, like banking sick days that get paid out when you retire, people retiring with a year's worth of sick days that get paid out, massive pensions, huge vacation allotments, benefits that, small private companies like I work for would never get. I get probably a better base salary to compensate for some of that, but some of the benefits they get, there's no way I will ever have matching benefits like them. I can barely take the vacation I'm allotted. I'm allotted a good amount of vacation because of my experience, but I don't have a union. I have a job. If I don't do my job, I get let go. I don't have a resolution process short of suing my employer. And I think a lot of union employees kind of forget that that's the other side of it. Like, if they were to go out in industry, they would actually have to put up results. They can't just do the bare minimum and expect, like, all of these things. I think there's a lot of frustration about all the jobs that have been lost and moved abroad, and that's a whole other discussion. But in the case of Canada Post, I don't think, from what I see, the balance of the world really has a lot of sympathy. You put yourself in this position. If you want to dig yourself out of it, instead of just demanding more money, demanding more benefits, think of a solution that could bring more money in to cover those costs. That's it.